I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today, my topic is Ain't Creativity Quaint? And I'm going to be looking at that by examining the poster for a jigsaw puzzle that I did recently that looks at children's books from the late 1800s through the early 1900s. And the question that I'm going to be raising is whether our creativity has been taken from us, whether the idea that we are all creative and that creativity and functionality are two things that go together. That's what I want to look at as a big part of the dispossession that I believe has been going on. And that idea that we can take care of ourselves, that we can take responsibility, that this isn't just something that is left to a few artists, but something that we all have the capability and the ability to tap into. And I'm going to look at that also in a larger context from a spiritual perspective as to whether this isn't just our God given right, but is our function, whether we indeed are God's creativity, not God's creation. Let's look at this. As those who've been watching me know, I am a jigsaw puzzle junkie, but this was my favorite kind of jigsaw puzzle, one that has clear color delineation and where everything that you put together is something interesting. When I looked at this, I wanted to read every single book on it, but mostly I wanted to read the ones that were for girls, that if I look at just from the corner here, it starts with the worst girl in school. There's another one, the girl who lost things. There are some that are clearly morality lessons. Like down here, you have a willful girl right next to winning and waiting with the picture of a couple on it. There are a lot that give tribute to past generations. There's one called Gran. There's another called For Dear Dad. And this looks sort of sinister to me, but I think it's partly that I'm not used to seeing young women dressed as ladies. And so there's an adulthood that is assumed throughout this. There's the Lady of the Hundred Dresses, which I'm going to guess is someone who was a seamstress and who was doing that for herself. There are 301 things a bright girl can do, and then the same for boys. There's many that are about adventure. There is the girl's adventure book, and there is a sense of capability. There's a girl of high adventure pictured on a horse in the moonlight. So there's not the sense that I think we've been given that girls in their imaginations were repressed, that they didn't think of themselves as capable of doing pretty much anything that a boy could do. There's many pictures of girls engaging in sports, although not as many as boys. And then if I look at the boys section, there are things like every boy his own mechanic. There are things like Play Up and Adventure Bound, and some that I'm sure don't actually age as well. The Happy Book for boys, that our boys, picturing them jumping fences. These are perhaps examples of what I called in another episode tonic masculinity, that it is a healing masculinity. It's something that is looking at taking responsibility for fixing things, for building things. There's many here that are about building and what kinds of projects you can do. And these are big projects, and where you can go and how you can take responsibility for yourself. Even going back to, I know we demean the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, but I grew up in that era and I lived for those little badges, for those little embroidered badges that had a very clear set of a to-do list of what you could learn and what you could teach yourself, and then gave you this little symbol of your competence in that. I think that that's something that we need to be bringing back. And then there are many that are just fun on here. This one on very private secretary, her curiosity aroused. I definitely want to read that one. And what else do we have? There are so many that just look at, here's what you can do and here's where you can go, and nothing out there is going to stop you. That's an image of ourselves that we have now, that kids are told, but they're not given the skills to realize that all of the skills are, this is a high-priced hobby if you're going to do it. If you're going to do knitting or sewing, that we're going to take advantage of the fact that if you have the time, you don't have the money. But if you have the money, you don't have the time. So we need to make this easy for you and exotic rather than something that is part of our everyday competence. Over on Charles Eisenstein's Substack, he's doing an excellent series on the nature of evil and really questioning that whole concept. I recommend it highly. In there, he's talking about power and the use of power in order to get more power. In the threads, there's been a conversation where I've talked about the only legitimate use of power over others being the power of a parent to give someone eventual power over themselves. And that I think the same thing scales up, that a government locally is to empower and enable families to have power over themselves, and a federal government is to enable communities to have power over themselves. At that smallest scale of the family, if you're raising kids to be dependent, to be permanent adolescents because they don't know how to do things for themselves, the simple things like cooking, like cleaning, like gardening, if there are no household chores that are part of how you be a family, then what you're creating is really the kind of society that we have now, in which people are saying, who's going to take care of me? Who's going to feed me? Who's going to house me? Who's going to fix the things that break? Rather than us being able to know how to do those ourselves and having a system in which we can do that for each other. And I'll end by looking at the spiritual aspect. In my Course in Miracles study this morning, it was, you are under no laws but God's. And part of that was saying you were created as the channel for God's creativity, which goes along with what I've said, which is that we are not God's creation, that we were created because one is the loneliest number. And so that God created us and put God's creativity within us, that we are the sole channel of God's creativity, that we are the woman, the womb of God, in which the universe and all of creation is in our belly, is always expanding, is always something that we continue to imagine and enliven, and where there is no loss and there is no death, and that all of the things that we're projecting from our place of separation, which is what we see as the world, is a projection on our closed eyelids, if we were to embody this. But really, our function is creativity. And that's what I feel we're not able to bring as a means of communication now, because our time is being taken from us, and we're investing consumer choices as our sole ability to be able to create. And I don't condemn anyone for that, because we need that. We need that form of expression. And if that's all that's being left to us, then it's not our fault, but it is the fault of the system. And this is a system that I believe we're going to be able to change. There's one of the commenters on Eisenstein's thread, Jeff Alexander, I think it is, and he talks about his parents' era and how they grew up in a rural area where no one locked their doors, their cars, and everyone watched out for themselves and everyone helped each other, and that it's not perfect, that there's still conflict, there's still problems, but that's possible. And that's, I think, the world that we're about to be able to recreate in a better form, because things are falling apart so fast. So keep this in mind. That world is not nostalgia. That world is our future, and it's coming soon. To follow this up, I'm going to suggest imagination seeks attention, and also what's the best that can happen. Thank you for watching.